here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the singer-songwriter Amy Rigby, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all the other groovy stuff. Has been in various bands, including the last Roundup and also the Shams, but has had a prolific solo career and released nearly 10 albums, and has worked with Reckless Eric and wrote a book a few years ago which is titled Girl to City, available from all good bookshops and also online. I'll give you the link in the notes below. Also, she's got some dates coming up, playing in Norwich on the 14th of March 2025, and then America, Europe, all that kind of malarkey. But again, I'll put the link to her website just below. But anyway, you're going to find out more about Amy and so much. Anyway, after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Amy, it's over to you.
Well, I guess there were a couple, but, maybe the first was Elton John, because I loved pop music. My parents had a lot of like Burt Bacharach and kind of, the pop music of the 60s. Maybe people called it easy listening, but, and I have an older brother and he was bringing home albums by like The Who and Led Zeppelin. And I did love that. But I think when I discovered Elton, he was kind of like my first artist. Like I realized, just like the whole album thing, the covers, the sort of story in each different album just really spoke to me as, not so much like pop music as just this creative journey of an artist. And so, I think I kind of, and he was like my first big concert when Goodbye Yellow Brick Road came out. And, I won tickets to go see the show, and I was 14, and my best friend and I went, and I wore like hot pants and like striped knee socks and, just kind of like really wanted to, just like represent, because I like believed in him so much, his style. And, I just loved his outrageousness. It was maybe a little like safer choice than David Bowie. I didn't really like, I didn't get Bowie or whatever. It just didn't like reach me.
Yes.
But so that was, just a very powerful, it was like a peak Elton period, just to see him at that,
Well, I would imagine, because I had an older brother who was born, I think he was born 1957, and he started bringing records into the house during the 70s, because we got a record player during then. I think being from a working class background, parents didn't ever borrow money, and I think they sold everything, got a bungalow, and then, once they got the family, and then things started to appear in the house looking back, and a record player, and they bought a few really cheesy records, and then my brother started bringing in things, and this was the kind of early to mid 70s, so it was like Sgt. Pepper, and there was no cultural context, but the other one was Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and I was absolutely fascinated. So he said, don't play my records. So obviously I sneaked into his room and played his records and was fascinated by, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And there was a song, that's probably the last song on side 4, Harmony, which I just thought was just amazing. And then another one called Roy Rogers and Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. So Elton had and that artwork as well was quite like, wow. And then there was tracks like Daniel, my brother, God, I'm forgetting. Yes, and they were on the radio, weren't they?
Yeah. And I don't know, like my husband and I have listened to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, like on our many like road, going out and playing gigs, and, gone like, is there any track that, because it was a double album, is there anything that should be left off of this album? But it all, even Jamaica Jerk Off, which is kind of just so silly, and but it or I've seen that movie too. Like, I don't know, but really, I had already gotten into like Mad Men Across the Water and Tumbleweed Connect. You know, I wasn't just like a fly by night, like this is a hit kind of fan. Like I was really, you know, in my early teens, just like a serious, like they called me Elton Girl.
Right.
my my friends and my family, you know, just knew that I was like obsessed with him. But then, you know, when I went to New York to go to art school, I discovered, and I felt, and it wasn't like to me, like, you know, Elton was doing like Philadelphia Freedom, and I wasn't, you know, I kind of lost my, you know, my deep fandom. I was kind of expanding, and had gone to see Bowie on the Station to Station tour, you know, and so coming to New York and discovering like what was going on at CBGB and stuff, and going to see the Ramones and pretty much like anyone who played there from 1976 to
Yes.
79.
So were your parents quite sort of musically hip at this stage? Did they sort of turn you on to anything interesting or have anything on their
No,
record player?
no. I mean, I really did like the soundtracks of like the era, the 60s soundtracks, like Sound of Music and you know, just any kind of like Broadway musical. And they did love that, but they were like not hip at all. But I babysat and in my teens, and the people I would babysit for were like a generation younger than my parents. Like my parents never wore jeans; they weren't hip in any way. But the people I babysat for, you know, I babysat for their kids, obviously, but they were younger. They would have like, I remember one of them having like the Edgar Winter group, and just like, you know, maybe a little bit different from what my brother had, you know, but so feel, and like they'd have Cat Stevens, or, you know, it was just more choice. But no, my parents were not, you know, they were really like more like Martinis, and my mother had Fur Coat, and, you know, they
Oh,
were
fantastic.
they were much more like, you know, sort of like Mad Men kind of
Yes,
era.
God, this is excellent. My God,
um,
so did they have, was that the kind of the American dream they were living at this stage?
they really were. I mean, you know, until I went to, you know, obviously I saw going into downtown. You know, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it was quite segregated, you know, like a lot of American cities were, in that, you know, like the town that I grew up in, actually, like blacks and Jews were not allowed to own homes in this town. Muhammad
Right.
Ali actually bought a house. He broke the color barrier in our town. He bought a house, a mansion, which he never lived in. But, you know, it was pretty incredible, that he, you know, that he did that. But I loved to go into downtown Pittsburgh because I just found it to be really kind of boring in the suburbs. And I loved going downtown and just seeing like all kinds of people, and just like found it, you know, really, really exciting and vibrant. And um, so but yeah, it was just like it was like a TV show in a way, more than I even realized, you know,
So
till
was
I.
it a bit like the Stepford Wives in some way? You know, was it kind of the perfect family? You know, the brother, sister, you know, two children, perfect marriage and all that.
No, no, because my parents were Catholic, so even, you know, Catholics were like down on the rungs of like, you know, and I had four brothers,
Oh,
and
full
you know,
brother.
my mom was Italian, my dad was Irish, so yeah, it wasn't, we weren't, you know, they weren't that white bread, you know, like, but and all the Catholic families around, like nobody had less than like three kids. Everybody had like, our neighbors had 10 kids.
Right.
It was just like really everyone had really big families. And my brothers, we all went to Catholic school, but when it came time to go to high school, my parents wanted me to go to the all girls school, but I just was like, I liked boys too much. And I just wanted to go to like the big public school, which, is like the opposite of the public schools here. I,
Yes.
I wanted to go to the school that everybody could go to. And I didn't want to just be with girls and with nuns. And, like I wanted to go and they had like a really nice new school building with like a beautiful art department, and I just was really interested in being an artist. And so like I just like kind of forced them to let me go to this other. So my brothers all went to like the boys' school, but I was the rebel in my
Nice.
family. And then when I went to New York, like a couple of my brothers ended up following me there, and one of them still lives in the same apartment he's been in since the late 70s. Like he is like he's now the New Yorker who will never ever leave, and that was my bad influence on him.
Yes. So when you got to 17, you left Pittsburgh for New York. Was that when you went to then college in
To
New
art
York?
school, yeah.
You went to art school, you thought, that's it, I'm going to be... What artists were you particularly drawn to during your sort of teen period? Who were you starting to sort of be quite interested or
Like
impressed with?
visual
Yes,
art.
the visual arts.
Well, obviously Andy Warhol, because he was like the only artist I heard of that came from
I
Pittsburgh.
know, this is very exciting, isn't it? Was there
Yeah.
much history at that stage about Andy, or not history, but was there much stories about Andy at that stage?
Just that he was known. He was probably one of the most famous like American artists at that point. So there was like a lot of like I went to this kind of every weekly art program in downtown Pittsburgh that was for kids from all over the city. You had to like be accepted into this program, and the big, one of the uh, big draws was that Andy Warhol had gone to this
Wow, yes.
class, and so it felt like such an honor. But really I just loved fashion, and I don't think I really had that much of a fine art background. I loved I loved magazines and like just the photos and illustrations in fashion magazines, and that was really kind of what made me want to go to New York. So it was really kind of more, I don't know, I don't want to say superficial, but it was just kind of more like a pop kind
Pop,
of thing
yes.
than being like, a serious fine artist. I just kind of wanted to, I wanted to go to New York, and I wanted to study something that had to do with art and fashion, and to just like be there where it was all happening, really.
It was kind of slightly hip and happening, but at the same time, 1976, New York isn't the New York that, it is obviously today, but also it was quite grim during that period, wasn't it? Did you find that a bit of a shock? Because from reports, it's kind of economically bankrupt and things aren't going terribly well, and there's lots of squats and lots of drugs and lots of down and out. So how did you find, you were 17, you were in New York? I mean, now we know it's all rather beautiful and glamorous, and we all wish we were there, but actually at the time, it actually sounds quite grim.
No, it was wonderful. I mean, yeah, I think in my book I said like it was dirty, it was dangerous. I loved it, there was this like abandoned cars, yeah, trash spilling out of those metal trash cans, like, and it was just, it just was kind of a free for all, and I guess that was what made it seem so enticing. Was like I remember the art schools having this big Halloween party at what was called the I want to call it the the counting house, but it was like down where the ferries went to like Staten Island, and
Right.
and it was I can't remember what it was actually called, but it was basically like a derelict building, and it was just like this big grand building that had just been sort of like left, like so many buildings in mostly in Lower Manhattan were just kind of left to decay, and so it was just sort of like, now it's so unthinkable. Everything's so manicured and clean and corporate, and when I see pictures of the neighborhoods I used to live in and just like the rubble, the abandoned buildings, it's just like, it's hard to believe. And London was the same. I went to London in 1980 and lived in a squad, and it was just like, wow, you could actually like live somewhere for free, like now it's just so, now that street is so it's in Notting Hill, like it's so fancy. You just can't believe that people were allowed to get away with the things
Yes.
could. But at the time it seemed, like that was just how you lived, and
So what was it like? Because you had CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, and then the sort of rise of disco, and then Studio 54. Did you sort of, and then you obviously had your love of Elton and that period of the early 70s. What was it like making that transition into the latter part of the 80s with punk rock and leaving the glam and the excess of Elton behind? Because I went to see I remember there was at the cinema Elton in concert, and he was, lots of costumes, weren't there? Lots of even dressed up as a duck at one stage, I seem to remember, wiggling his little bottom in the air, and then punk came along with Joey Ramone, and then obviously disco and that whole scene.
It seemed like it was all happening simultaneously, really. Like some of my friends at arts in Parsons at art school were into Fiorucci and going to Studio 54, and some were, just going down, that was uptown, and some were going downtown to CBGB and stuff. But it was all just sort of out, like you just choose which way you wanted to be outrageous. But I didn't think there wasn't like a battle between, not in New York. I know out in America there were sort of rock DJs who were like, we're going to burn all the disco records,
Yes.
and
disco sucks.
Which just felt in a way kind of racist, like but I think in New York, all of that just sort of coexisted and kind of fed each other.
Did you go to Max's Kansas City as well as CBGB's?
I did, maybe not as much. I always felt like the Max's crowd seemed more sort of like older and more like decadent in a like Andy Warhol kind of the past way, whereas it felt like CBGB's was a little more like democratic and so that I think.
Did you start picking up on the sort of the UK kind of scene coming over as well to New York? Did you start seeing all those bands that were sort of appearing as well?
Went to see like X-Ray Specs when they came, saw the Jam. I remember the Jam seeming like that was the first band I saw that I was just like, it's a little too much of a pose, like with the suits and like it didn't feel authentic.
Right.
And in a way that I couldn't really tell from the records, but just seeing them live, it just like the aesthetic of it was not to my taste. Whereas like Polystyrene and X-Ray Specs, they just seemed so creative. Like there weren't any rules about how they and she really stood out because she was like smiling on stage. It's this big smile with her like lunchbox purse, and it just seemed like, oh, I thought you had to be cool and like not smile on stage, but she's being natural and genuine, and everybody was smiling then, and it was just seemed kind of revolutionary in a way that she wasn't putting on a pose to look like she wasn't happy to be there. And so
yes. And did they have Laura Logic on saxophone at that stage?
No, she wasn't. Although I did see her in London playing one of her own
concerts recently.
Concerts. Yeah. Essential Logic, were they called?
Essential. Yes, Essential.
Yeah.
Oh, marvelous
So,
stuff.
and I mean, a crazy thing back then was like, so it was really kind of easy to go to London from New York. There were these, you could go for like $25. I think it was $29 on Laker. Was this?
Oh, Freddie Laker. Yes.
But there were also like, you could go for free as a courier. Like you just had to like show up at the airport, at like an hour before the plane took off, and just sort of accompany some sort of envelope, like, and you just would get you just fly for
My God.
so anyway, people there was it wasn't that hard to go over there. You just had to like get a passport, and anyway, so
Yes. And how did the 70s kind of progress towards the sort of early 80s for you? So were you doing your course into 1980, or
yes,
so
yeah.
that went into sort of, and when did you finish that?
Well, that I finished in 1980, but the it was around, I think it was 78 that we 78, 79, we started this club in Lower Manhattan. We started it as a dance party that just kind of like, we had a space on St. Mark's Place that we kind of all fixed up together to just have like play records and invite people and they had to pay $3, but then it was like a social club, so we could give beer away.
Fantastic.
You couldn't buy beer, but we would provide the beer if, and people like lined up to come to this thing. And that was with Angela, whose book I
Oh,
think.
yes, Angela Yago.
And it
Right.
was, but then, after a couple of weeks, the police shut it down and we had to find other places to hold it. And eventually Angela's sister was waitressing at this restaurant like way downtown. And they like were just like not getting enough business. And the owners said, like, she talked them into letting her put this night on in the restaurant, and that became this club called Tier 3.
Tier 3.
Tier 3, and it was like a dance party. At first it was just dance party, but then Angela's sister Hillary started booking bands, and then the British bands started coming, because Hillary and Angela had met the Slits over in London, and they came and played, and just like the Raincoats came.
God, you had the pop group, the Young Marble Giants.
Yeah, they all came and played, and it was really, I mean, there wasn't even a stage. I think when the Slits came, there wasn't a stage, and it was such a mess. Like nobody could see. I think they built a little stage after that, but and at first the club was just like giving all the money to the band. Like it was it was really just a free for all, and it was just kind of like our clubhouse, but yeah, all these people were coming to play. And so that was the end of my school years, was like just being at this club all the time. And
I'm not surprised. Did you meet people like Basquiat and Keith Haring at this stage?
Yeah, but Jean-Michel Basquiat he was part of the Stinkies, the early dance party. He was just a friend, like hanging out. And in Tier 3, I think there was a point where my brother was sleeping in the basement. Maybe Jean-Michel was sleeping. It was three floors, so that's why it was called Tier 3. But he might have been kind of squatting there too. Like people were sort of, using it as a place he might have kept some painting materials there. And, we all laugh about the friend who had a party, and Jean came and like painted one of his slogans on when he had a kind of graffiti thing called Samo before he started becoming more of like a serious painter. And him and this guy Al Diaz would paint these like pithy slogans on the and like so he came and painted this thing on our friend's wall, and then the next morning we all went over and like painted over it because he was so worried about what his landlord was going to say. And there's probably so many apartments in New York that have like things painted over that.
Yes.
and others who've like friends who've like thankfully held on to like the doors and things that he painted, that
yes,
been
God.
able to like live have some sort of stake in his artistic career, which was sort of just such a, it's kind of mind-boggling.
It's very mind-boggling. And there was obviously Tier 3, there's Danceteria and the Mud Club all appearing. Were you sort of connected to or going to all those different sort of venues?
Our whole idea was like the Mud Club was much more like, again, sort of a darker, like more sophisticated vibe, and Tier 3 was really just supposed to be more like fun. And even though there was plenty of drug use and plenty of darkness there, it was just kind of meant to be more kind of I don't know, again, like the word democratic keeps coming into my head. Like it was not elitist, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like it was just supposed to be kind of like for everybody. And Danceteria was kind of that felt like the first like professional club,
right.
like, where they had, like money to kind of like design it, and it felt much more intentional, which a word we never would have used back then, but it felt much more like, this is like they've taken the thing that was natural and now that's kind of becoming more designed so that more kind of people can come and enjoy it, who might not have found their way there like naturally, but like it was more marketed or something. I don't know.
Yes.
But it was still like a lot of fun and a great, and that was where my Angela and I briefly had a band together, the Stair Kits, where she was singing, I was playing drums, and my brother was playing bass. And but then we had another band a few years later that was more of a country sort of.
Is this the Shams?
This was called Last Roundup.
So that was your first kind of
a real band that like actually like worked and gigged and recorded and made a record and toured. And the Stair Kits was very short. That was like 2 gigs. But
when did the last Roundup, when did you form?
It formed in about 1982.
Right.
And we finally put out an album in 1987. It just took a lot of try. It seemed like a lot harder back then to put out music. We recorded a whole album in Nashville in like 1984 that never saw the light of day, but we finally signed to a label and put out an album in 1987. And then the Shams was sort of, came out of that. What was it, like right after that.
How come the band lasted such a short time when the album came out, after all those years of getting it together, getting on Rounder Records, and then suddenly, we're finished now, that's enough?
Well, we did this, the album came out and people loved it. We did a tour of the US, like we traveled, all the way, drove, all the way west from New York to California, the width and breadth of the country. It took about 2 months. And by the time we got back home, like we were all kind of, burnout and broke. And that was that was when I said, like, oh, maybe I should. There's no way I'm going to be doing this like when I'm 40. Maybe I should have a baby. And like a month and a half later, I actually was pregnant. And so I had, so in 19, like, so I got pregnant, and I just kind of gravitated towards being with my female friends, they'd been in last Roundup. And then at the end, these two women that I was with in the Shams, they weren't in last Roundup when we made an album, but we'd kept kind of singing together, doing Christmas carols and stuff. And I just kind of felt, I think I needed like that support of like my female friends when I had a baby.
Yes.
And,
Did you, at that stage during the 80s, had you sort of, I mean, obviously being in the band means you're probably much more focused on that, but were you kind of excited by the musical shifts that happened during the 80s in the UK and, I don't know, back in, America, the UK and, the rest of the world? Were you sort of following that next path of the musical shifts that were happening from punk to post-punk, new romantic, electronic music, indie pop with the people like the Smiths? Did that all was that on your radar?
I think when I went back to, I was in London for a year in like 80, 81. And when I went back to New York, I just got so excited by rap, by hip hop and rap music. It was really, that was just, it was on the street, and it was just felt like so exciting.
Right.
So that kind of for and it was on the radio. You didn't have to, I was always so broke back then. Like you didn't have to buy it. You didn't have to do, it was there like everywhere you went on the street. You could hear some guy with a boombox playing The Message or White Lines or, Grandmaster Flash. So I really did love that. But also, when I was in London, I definitely started in really getting into reggae, like I think maybe Gina from the Raincoats gave me a cassette that was like all like, one of those mixed cassettes everybody made
Yes.
back then, with Althea and Donna and, Breakfast in Bed and that I just like treasured that cassette. And so I think that, and that was kind of around when I started discovering old country music. So I don't think I really like kept up with what was coming out of the UK then so much as just experiencing what was happening like right around in the city, going to, there was this place called Club Negril where they were having like rappers and break dancers coming down from the Bronx and playing in the East Village. And it was just like, so it felt like a secret club. It was just so fun. And
Yes. My God. I suppose you had Public Enemy and LL Cool J and
yes,
Curtis Blow and
saw Run DMC at the Roxy roller rink, and that I just really enjoyed that. It just felt like a reflection of like where we lived. And but at the same time, a lot of Southerners were moving to New York City at the time, like in the social circle that I was in. And I really loved like their vibe. And I loved they all had like cast iron skillets and pickup trucks, and they all knew how to cook.
right.
And yeah, so they all knew how to cook like fried chicken and cornbread. And I don't know, it was just became like such, that was kind of how Last Roundup started, because a couple of our Southern friends who then became the Shams with me, Sue and Amanda, they were both really good cooks. And we would just like make these big dinners and all sit around like singing Hank Williams songs. And that's kind of like how the whole country thing
The whole
started.
vibe. I suppose at that time you started having people like Nancy Griffith appearing, didn't you? Sort of, there's a few kind of contemporary. I mean, we'd had Suzanne Vega, Michelle Schott, Tracy Chapman. They're not
Yeah,
country, but they're sort of
the
bit folk, I
folky.
suppose.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a rise in sort of the sort of female singer-songwriter during that period, wasn't there?
Well, there
And
wasn't, and for me, there was. I discovered this artist Hazel Dickens, who was a West Virginia, the daughter of a coal miner who wrote and sang songs. Kind of, she didn't really do so much love songs as like songs for working people and songs about just like hard life. And she just really, I just loved her voice. I grew up near West Virginia, so I felt a connection. And then she was on Rounder, so we got to meet her and hang out with her. And she just was really like, really such a powerful singer and influence. Like, just as far as, yeah, I did love Nancy Griffith too, although I never got to see her. And there were the Roaches,
oh
that,
yes,
uh, I think they were like a big influence on the Shams, the Hammond song that they did.
yes. I was thinking. I think the Indigo Girls was a bit later, aren't they? Can't quite
They
remember.
they were, they were they were really like, the Shams opened for them on a tour when they were just like blowing up with
Oh right.
Define. And that was, they were just phenomenal performers and both really great singers and players. And so that, we went, but I, at the time I had like a 13-month-old baby.
Yes.
Or she wasn't even quite, maybe she was about a year old, and we were on tour with the baby in the van and opening for the Indigo Girls, like trying to, just like get somebody to watch my daughter backstage when we were like on stage.
Yes, that must have been really tricky, wasn't
It
it? I
was,
know I've heard quite a few people talking about this experience in the early, trying to sort of sort out plugs and milk and,
yes, exactly.
nappies and, yeah, a bit like, right, I gotta go, you're just gonna have to hold the baby.
Yeah.
And
At
we're,
the time, I didn't know anybody who had had to do that, and it was really kind of like, um, it was really kind of hard.
yes.
It's fun, but at the same time, it was kind of fun.
And
And
you with the Shams, you did one album, Quilt, that was on Matador Records. So did this particular band, did that come together a bit easier than the last Roundup?
I think so, because I had a 4-track, like a Porta studio, and had started recording myself, and was able to like, do demos for us. And so the whole recording process was much more like, had become much more like a regular thing. And so the first recording we put out, we just made on the 4-track. And then, yeah, so when we went into a studio, maybe we had like more experience with that. So but it still took a little while for our first album. Our album came out in 91, and so we'd been recording and playing, like performing, and but it took a little while. Um,
Blimey, that's quite. And who did you have on guitar? Was that Robert
well, we
Quinn?
had we had Lenny Kaye was a big fan and produced the album. And he'd done the Suzanne Vega
He
um,
did,
album.
yes.
So he was, people didn't really think of him as a producer, but he was a wonderful, wonderful, like, the way he like facilitates with Patti Smith, like he's so supportive. And then through him, we had Robert Quine came and played on a couple tracks. Usually we just performed as a trio though. So,
And
um,
was that your brother Will on drums?
oh, he was my first husband.
Blimey, there you go.
Yeah,
The
he had a band called the DBs, and
DBs, which were a famous New York band, weren't they?
yeah, from North
God.
Carolina, but they were formed in New York and lived in New York for many years. But so he was my first husband. We were still married when he played with the Shams, but then we were kind of like splitting up sort of in the mid-90s. And
Yeah. So how did you then, once the album came out, did you tour with that album at all? Or
we did tour. And but again, like I had my daughter was just like a little kid, and so it was always trying to balance.
yes.
Because at the time, Will Rigby he was playing with Matthew Sweet. He was playing playing drums with the DBs had split up, and he was doing, getting gigs playing with people who were going on these long tours. And so I was kind of like home with our daughter quite a lot. So I was trying to like balance or take my daughter on the road with me. So that's probably part of the reason things always kind of took a while, because
Well, yes.
I was working I was working temp jobs to make money. So it was always there was always like a lot of that, like trying to make money, do keep a vehicle running in New York City, and yeah.
Keeping it together. So then, when did you decide to become a solo artist then? Was that sort of a few years later in the mid-90s?
It was it was around 92 that I started. So pretty much after the Shams album came out, I started playing solo shows, because I think I just felt like it was such a challenge juggling everything. And I just really wanted to kind of, put everything into it. And, whereas being in a band, like the other, one of the women had her fashion business. Amanda had a fashion design business, and Sue had another band. And, I just really kind of wanted to like put everything into it. So I started doing, and I
Did that
just,
feel like quite a relief to sort of just think, right, this is going to be my project now?
I don't know. I mean, I always wrote so many songs that I felt like it would be easier to like get them out there, and yeah, be more focused. And I don't know if it felt like like a relief, but I definitely felt like just driven to do it. So it was certainly not comfortable to leave my gang behind, and kind of, and felt, and also, it wasn't easy on my marriage. My marriage broke up, so but
Yes.
but that wasn't the reason why, but it certainly didn't help.
No, but then, because years later, I don't know how many, but because John Peel becomes obsessed with Laura Cantrell, doesn't he?
uh,
And and then I went to see her live at the Norwich Arts Centre and loved her first two albums, possibly more. But anyway, but that's the album that you wrote, Don't Break the Heart, isn't it? That she covers.
she covered it. Yeah, it was on my first solo album, but Laura had started, I think she started covering it like a little, yeah, like maybe the late 90s, or maybe because it's on When the Roses Bloom Again.
Yes.
That's from 2000, maybe, or no.
When the
Yeah, I think
Roses.
it came out in 2000 or 2002, maybe.
I can't remember. There was
I
one
think
called.
the first album came. The thing is, because I'm just about finished with the second book called Girl to Country, and I've been revising, but there's a scene there where I'm playing in Scotland, in Glasgow, with Sid Griffin, and it was my first tour in the UK, and Laura just happened to be in Glasgow, and that was right when her first album came out, and so that was the year 2000. That's how I know, I have these dates all pinpointed, just because that's where I am in the book, is like the year 2000.
Yes, so this was so When the Roses is 2002,
Yeah.
Not the Trembling Kind is 2000. So that's probably when I saw her. I don't She hadn't got this one because this had, yeah, you're right, When the Roses Bloom Again. And I think there was a song that she dedicated to John Peel. I don't know which one it was actually. I, um, I think that was, I don't know, it was a song that, because he must have just died before that album came out, because I think one of the songs was a tribute to him, because she went to his house and did sessions and stuff like that,
Right,
and
right.
so it was all very
Yeah,
emotional. But
it must have been the mid-2000s that he died, right? Maybe.
yeah, we'll Google this
We'll look
later.
it up.
This
Look
is
it
great. This is great,
up.
great. I know. Yeah. So your response to you must have been very pleased with the sort of the response you got with this, the first solo album.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't expect it to be so, that's not true. I knew I mean, I knew when I was trying to get someone to put it out, that that I was doing something that I thought was important. It took me a couple years to find a label and finish and then I like went in with Elliot Easton and recorded more songs. And I knew as we were mixing it and putting it all together, I just felt like it's really special and people are going to really respond to this. And so I think I just took it as my as my due because I've been working for so long that it didn't seem like it was out of nowhere. I felt like I worked and worked for years doing, playing in bands, writing songs, kind of busting my ass to
Yes.
keep going. And so it felt like it did all kind of come together. And it was really just like the next part that was like to try to keep going. That was really the
It was
hard.
tricky, but actually, from the UK, we always loved discovering new things because I know there was a period, there was Dar Williams, Sean Colvin, Kim Ritchie. There was suddenly a whole, I think Gillian Wells, Stacey Earle. I saw all these names suddenly, an artist, and like either John Peel or Whispering Bob Harris. It was something very exciting. Discovering something in the UK, in America, seemed very, yes, important somehow, and feel like you're the only one who knew that artist, and then you realise you weren't. So I think I wouldn't say it would be easy, but there's a lot of nerdy people in the UK, aren't there, who sort of love to discover a new singer-song, country-esque singer-songwriter, and you obviously fall in. And there was Indigo Girls that we mentioned earlier, so it was a good time in a way to be a singer-songwriter.
I guess that's true. I hadn't really thought about it, because like I said, I'm working on this second book where it just feels like I have so many times I'm going over to play in the UK and I'm always struggling to find an audience. So it's and still fucking, so it's never,
It's never.
and I remember like playing this amazing venue in Glasgow opening for Lucy Kaplansky, and there's like a couple hundred people there and I'm like like, oh my god, I didn't know there were that many people that lived in Glasgow because I've only seen 20, like when I've played my own gigs I've only seen like 30 or so it was kind of like I've never really fit into that singer songwriter kind of like I've never found the audience that those like Dar and Kim who so I don't know, like I've always been a little outside that, maybe too rock for that. My
Yeah, I
records
don't know.
aren't like singer-songwriter kind of records, really. They
Right.
have more kind of psychedelic or just more in the rock direction. And so it just never really quite fits into that
Oh,
America.
it's so tricky. When you did your follow-up album, did you have John Porter? Was he your producer on that album?
No, there was a guy named John Porter that worked for the record label, but he's not the John Porter that's the producer, John Porter.
Right. Okay, that's fair enough. Because there was one he did work on the Smiths, and he was, I think,
Yeah, no,
Roxy Music, but this is a different one.
a different guy. Yeah.
Right. Got you now. Gee, you gotta. So what was it like doing your follow-up album? Because you're still on the same label, aren't you?
Yeah, I was still it was I ended up just going back out and working with Elliot Easton again and Don Heffington. And yeah, this sort of the same people that I'd worked with in Los Angeles the first time that had brought it all together. And it was good and it was challenging and it was I think I think the songs were good and some now in retrospect maybe some of the arrangements aren't what I would choose now, but I think I don't think it was like I don't think I let myself down or anything. um, and I
Yes.
still, like a couple of the songs are still like, part of my, like kind of my catalog that like people always want to hear. All I Want and Summer of My Wasted Youth are definitely like two that I just kind of, you know, I'll
Did
always.
you? So with that though, because the third album that you do, this is all on the same label. Was that your contract with them at
Yes,
that point to do
I had,
a
I
three
had
album
three.
deal?
So the Sugar Tree that I made in Nashville in the year 2000, and then just like they promptly like took all the albums out of print and made a sort of best of called and that I called 18 again, which was sort of I mean I don't even now I'm not even sure if that was a good idea, except it felt like at the time this was pre-streaming, um, pre MP3s, even really. Like it was just like a different time. I think I felt like, well, they were going to take all those albums out of print, so it was basically like that part of my catalog with my solo artist catalog wouldn't exist anymore. So they put these 18 tracks that were kind of like a best of from the three albums
God.
together, or I picked the tracks and put it together. Um, and then I've bootlegged and sold Diary of a Mod Housewife for the last 25 years. I mean, it's been out of print since 2001, but I've done it on vinyl, I've done it on CD, and I've got it back up on stream. It was never on streaming, and I just put it up there a couple months ago, and they haven't come at me. But
No.
if they do, I will fight, because I'm sure like I've successfully sold the record for years and years, and nobody's said a thing. So
Yes. Wow. I'm sure they're not going to worry, are they? It's a long time ago now. So when your next album, which is I've Got the World on a Broken String, this was your own, was this self-produced and on
yeah,
your own label?
it was a compilation of live solo just tracks from different solo shows, and I put that together and just put it out, to have something else to sell, and because people and I liked the stripped down versions from the solo shows, and so it was nice, because that was how I was doing a lot of touring. Wasn't with a whole band, I was just touring on my own with an acoustic guitar, so it was kind of nice to be able to.
So when you kind of 2003 with the next album, were you still in New York at this stage, or had you sort of relocated?
I'd moved to Nashville
You'd
in
gone to Nashville.
99. Yep.
By God. I think Taylor Swift did as well, didn't she? But probably a bit later. She seemed to be obsessed with Nashville. I think she made the family move with the country vibe. I suppose at that stage, was Shania Twain sort of in the charts and all that?
Yeah, she was. I mean, I went because I wanted to make a living and I wanted to get a publishing deal, and that was my focus. And I did. So that at least allowed me to be able to like support my daughter and be able to concentrate on music rather than having to like work another job and try to do everything else at the same
So
time. And
when you get a publishing deal, because it's very interesting, this subject, so how does it work? Is it like being employed by somebody and they'll say, I say
sort
yes.
of, I mean, well, they bought the rights to my catalog that existed up till that point, and a certain number of songs that I would write, in the years to come while I was
Yes.
under contract, and gave me an advance and like a monthly draw, they call it. And I think, yeah, I can't remember what my contract said as far as how many songs I was going to have to turn in, but I knew I was going to be writing songs anyway. So that was helpful. And it also, when I didn't have a label, it helped. They would pay for to make demos, and of course they would charge me back for, like they would want to recoup that money eventually. But
Yes.
they would, that like my next album, Till the Wheels Fall Off, a lot of those were financed by my publishing deal, paying for me to demo the songs that were on the record.
God, it's such as interesting. There's never really been a documentary. I'm not sure if it would be that interesting apart from to a few people, but just the way, there's a sort of a split, isn't there? The ownership of the music, the publishing and the rights and all this. And,
Yeah,
you know,
it's kind of, yeah, like a mind, it's very, it's there's a lot there's a lot of parts to it all, but that's, and it is interesting. I hope people, that's what I'm writing about now, that part of my life, and that part of like trying to, you know do music, and hopefully it will be. I find it interesting. It's, I remember someone referring to it as like, now they just call it probably hustling, but someone called it like log rolling, like, like you're doing this on that log with that foot, and then you're trying, like you're just trying to keep afloat, by doing all these different things, like making records and writing songs and
yes.
touring and trying to get someone else to record some songs. And
I know
um,
when you're sort of just a fan and you're just looking at bands and buying the record, and it also seems so straightforward. But then when you hear the process, you think, "Oh my God, that sounds like a nightmare." How do you? No wonder,
I
no
know
wonder.
we're supposed to just, make it just seem like it just magically all
Magically happen. I
happen.
know.
And some of it, that's the amazing thing. The songs actually are magic, and they do just appear, and it's really like all the other part that, that's just like, that's the hard work and the
That
craft.
is the hard work. So when you did the next album, which was Faulkner Dylan, and then you had Little Fugitive, which was 2005. So you're almost doing an album a year, and then there's a gap. What happens after 2005? Did you have a bit of
Um,
a
Yeah, I was in a really bad relationship, and it just kind of like, kind of just, I won't say it destroyed my life, but it really had an impact on me. And then I got together with Reckless Eric, and we, I think I kind of like escaped really, and we moved to France together. And my daughter was going off to college in Chicago, and I was escaping from this bad, um, abusive relationship, and so I think I kind of just like, it was going somewhere to heal really.
well,
And
quite, yes.
and
Did you have to escape, as in kind of think, right, so I don't care. I'm just taking a few things and going.
it wasn't, yeah, it was kind of very impulsive in a way, and also, yeah, just, you know we found somewhere to live in the French countryside, and yeah, just my daughter was in school in Chicago, and yeah, I don't think I really like overthought it, and
No.
felt like I kind of just needed to put some distance between my
Well, there's
my
quite a
stuff.
lot of water, really, wasn't there?
Yes.
The ocean.
And so it did take me, I
How
remember
did you meet Eric, by the way?
we met at a gig at a pub in Hull. I was playing up in Hull where um where he'd gone to art school, and it turned out, that the room that I met him in, which was a room above a pub, was the first place he'd ever played Whole Wide World.
Oh,
And we met
wow.
because I covered Whole Wide World and was a fan, and the promoter had kind of brought him to the gig that I was playing, to DJ, and we met, but we kind of kept in touch a little bit when from that first night, but we didn't get together till 5 years later. So
Yes, I thought when you had the location Hull, I thought you were going to be that's because that's where the Spiders from Mars, David Bowie's band, come from. There, Mick
yeah,
Ronson
yeah,
and Trevor
Johnson.
and Woody, and I thought, oh, you're going to say this is their first ever, and it's but anyway, it's still romantic. I
It
mean,
was
let's
my
face
it
it.
was like my third time in Hull, and people were like, "Why do you keep going back to Hull?" And it just like spoke to me. Like the people just really seemed to like me, and I don't know, we just seemed to click, and then it turned out that that's where Whole Wide World had come from, and it just sort of like brought us together there, really.
That's magical. That is so nice, actually.
I
So then,
know.
when you were in France, then you went to France. Yes, I'm not completely got the timeline and location, but when you got to France, did you start then making music again? Because there's quite a gap, isn't there, between?
I'd been playing. I mean, I remember playing, like, I was performing, touring, still playing I played the Winnipeg Folk Festival in summer of 2006. But yeah, I hadn't written a song in like 2 or 3 years, 2 years. And I remember being in France, and my daughter came and visited, and Eric's daughter was visiting, and they were both like, young women. My daughter was 18, and Eric's daughter was like in her early 20s. And I finally, like, I just got this inspiration to write a song called Please Be Nice to Her, that's on the first album that Eric and I made together. But that just felt like, oh my God, I will write songs again. I hadn't even engaged with the idea that I just like couldn't write anymore, but I had just had to stop. It was almost like I had to like maintain my privacy because I was being stalked by the person that I had like gotten away from, and I just like had to, just like shut down kind of. So Eric and I were like having fun playing a lot of cover songs, and that
Yes,
that was like how, that was how we were passing our time in France, was just playing covers, and then finally I wrote something, and so was able to start up again.
God, that's nice, isn't it? The creative moment. Did you then start a record label, Southern Domestic?
Yeah, yes,
Domestic.
yeah. The first record we did together came out on the Stiff, like the regenerated Stiff album label. Um, but then, the second we put out ourselves, and the third, and yeah, put out like quite a few records ourselves on
Yes,
Southern Domestic
and
label,
also one by Alan Clayson.
and that's true.
That's
That's
well, it's funny because well, it's not that funny. But I did an interview with him quite recently, actually, because he was
Oh,
in a
really?
yes, dear old Alan.
Yeah.
I have no. I
There's
mean,
there's
it's
nobody like him. Yeah, he came to Eric's known him forever, and he came to France and recorded, and yeah, he's really really something. But
yes, and the Len Bright combo, which I bought one of the singles. Someone must have nailed us together in
um,
1980 something, which there was only probably about 10 sold, and I bought one of them. I don't know.
yum.
I don't know. I seem to remember the DJ was either Andy Kershaw or John Peel saying that was recorded for £50. The album, probably the album.
I loved that album though. I didn't discover it till later, but
Yes, that was nice. That was really good. So when did you come to the UK? When did your move happen
in August
August what year?
this year.
Oh, right. So you've been in France for all that time.
No. We actually moved to New York in 2011.
Right.
Eric, I moved up to like near Woodstock, New York, and lived there for 13 years. And but we've been kind of coming over to Eric has grandchildren down in Sussex, and so we've been, and always like keep playing gigs over in the UK, and like Eric's, he's a big part of people's lives here. A certain part of the population, just people who like grew up with his early records. And
well, yes.
And so I don't know, he turned 70, and it just seemed like a good time to my daughter moved to LA, so she'd been living in New York, but she seemed like a plane ride away anyway. So I think we just decided, and just got really kind of fed up with the weather in upstate New York. It was either always snowing or just too hot and disgusting. And so we actually moved here for the weather.
Nice. Well, it's like, no, I'm English. We love talking about the weather. So that's all good stuff, isn't it? So when so you wrote your book actually in the sort of the latter part of the teen period, didn't you?
Yeah, I started it when we lived in France, and just like finished it. It took a while to get it done and get it out. And so it came out in 2019.
Yes. Well, it's very good because you probably noticed in the last 5 years, well, I have, everyone's writing their book now. It's kind of like, it's brilliant, but quite relentless. So you were in there quite first, weren't you?
Well, I tried to get in, like, when I started, there was only Patti Smith, Just Kids. That was like the only one.
Yes, I was just thinking
and then they were all coming, like, and I love Viv Albertine's book, and so but I love memoirs. It doesn't matter, like I think as a genre, it'll carry on forever. There just happen to be a lot of musicians who are in a a reflective mode now. I think I started mine thinking, oh, this could be a good way to make money. Well, for the amount of hours and time I spent writing, it's just like the worst, like, minimum wage job ever. But I really love writing, and so I think that's I hope to get this. Well, I will get this second book out in the fall, and hope to do like the French book after that, and just keep putting out.
Well, yes. Well, I must admit, though you mentioned it was a bit minimum wage. Did it also have a certain sense of sort of, I don't know, processing stuff and
Totally.
sort of dealing with stuff that
It really did. I really did. And, I think I found a sense of peace, and also, I found so many things from writing, like, an appreciation and a kind of acceptance of a lot of things. A lot of it was even like with my dad, who never really believed in some of the choices that I made about, like being a musician and stuff. And I, but in writing, I kind of saw that in his way, he had been supportive and believed in me, even though he, maybe hadn't shown it in in the way I wanted it to, but it was only in writing a scene about him, kind of telling somebody that they should, fucking pay attention. Like just hearing him tell a stranger about me that like, when I wrote that scene, that it just like, it felt like I healed something that had, been really like bothering me for many, many years. And it was really like a powerful, and there were other moments like that, but that was like a really big one.
Yes, well, it's kind of amazing. I think sometimes it's very easy to reflect back and look back on life and just remember all the kind of the things that went wrong. And sometimes, yeah, I don't know what you might have, but personally, we have a lot of photo albums, and sometimes I look back and sort of think, oh yeah, I forgot all these other things, but they were the quite good things and the nice things. But I've slightly found myself focusing on the kind of bits that didn't go terribly well, or the friendships that went badly, or moments which weren't great. And then but that's the story that I'm telling myself, and then I have to set my brain to say, no, that's not the whole story, is it? It's just a little bit of it, the whole story. And if you choose, my God, I can choose to focus on the positives. It feels a bit like, oh, okay, that's a bit unusual.
That's the hard thing about writing. If you want to do it right and well, you can't just like trot out these well-worn anecdotes or stories that you've told over about this thing that happened. And, you really have to kind of like go beyond that and kind of like get to kind of the point of all of the things that happened. And even, like when I do the thing at American Library, like I'm going to read a little and play too, but there's certain parts of my book when I read them out loud, I'll always break down, cry. Like I won't break down, but I will well up with the feelings that I got when I was making, just making these discoveries as I wrote the book. They were so, they like were so meaningful that they're there like in the words, and they're there like in these passages, just like a song would have that same sort of emotional effect for me. And so I guess that's what I aim for when I'm writing. I don't know that every like musician who writes a book goes through that, but I hope that people would like at least like throw themselves into it enough to like get these revelations that kind of go beyond just kind of like telling like how you put this record together, or how, because that's what I always want when I read somebody's book. I want to know like what it felt like or something. And
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that the more one can reveal at those moments, the more people can relate to that narrative, rather than just sort of, we went into the studio, this producer was here, that happened, we recorded this song. It's not that exciting, but some of the kind of other bits.
In Bali.
Yes, but the other bits where
celebrities that I met,
yes. So that's always. But when you did the new album, Hang In There With Me, which came out last year, this was on a really good label, isn't it? Which I know a lot of. I'm not sure how do you pronounce it, by the way?
They say it Tapeta. I like Tapeta better, but
Tapeta. Yeah. So did they approach you? Did you have the demo?
They had worked with Eric on his 2023 album Leisureland, and I can't remember how they came to him, but and then they talked to me from I got to meet them when they were working with him, and I was working on this record for 3 years, and they were like, well, let us hear it, but we'd like to put it out. And maybe I can't remember if they wanted to hear something from it, or if they just knew that it would be okay. They liked my last album, The Old Guys, my last sort of studio album. And so it was nice to work with a label.
Yes, it's quite nice. They can do the admin. Did you start Was this all written during the kind of lockdown period?
Yes. Yeah. I think we started recording maybe in 2021.
Yes.
Just and I was also doing like a lot of recording just of stuff like on my laptop, just kind of like through the pandemic, and I turning my book into a podcast, and just like doing. I just was working a lot, really, and so I think getting the album together was, and it maybe as these things do can kind of take a little while when you're like trying to do it at home and do it along with doing everything else. But anyway, it all seemed like it ended up being like of a piece, and it all like all the songs kind of fit together, and so it was good to be able to get it out, and yeah, they definitely want to do another one, and
God, that's fantastic.
yeah, I know. I am really happy. I mean, yeah, it's nice to have somebody to work with on this stuff, for sure. And I'd finish another record like next month if I didn't have this book looming. Like I just need to finish this book and get it out. And so I really want to get another record out next year. So I've got all the songs, and I'm sure I'll have more.
So where did you record the album?
We recorded it in our studio in New York. Eric, when we moved over here to North Walsham, we filled a shipping container with mostly with recording equipment and amplifiers, keyboards. Like it's quite a studio. Like Eric is a gear collector going back decades, and
Right.
he did get rid of some stuff for the move because there just was too much. He was willing to like let go of a Farfisa and a Vox Continental because they're just like take up too like British houses are so small. They just take up too much space. And so anyway, yeah, so we have just record in the studio in our house.
Brilliant. But was this album recorded in New York, or was it recorded in North Walsham?
In New York, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it was finished. The recording was finished in December of 2023, like the mixing and everything. And so, yeah, had to get all the parts in as we were trying to paint and like decorate our house in New York to put that up for sale so that we could, we knew we were going to move in the summer. And so so we literally like moved the month that the album came out. And I think they were kind of doubting me that I would have a whole tour booked, but I did like 20 dates in the US and another, like, I don't know, 10 or something in the UK in October and November. So,
you really have pushed yourself, haven't you?
Yes,
It's far too stressful. But then have you got a studio set up now in North Walsham?
Yes, yeah, and in fact, Eric is down there right now, like working on his new record. And it's amazing. It looks like it just got picked up and plopped in the, like, I can't believe how fast it became sort of the studio, but because it was just like a little sitting room.
Yes.
With some sort of like floral curtains and a wood burner when we moved in, and now the wood burner's gone, the curtains are gone, it's paneled, and like got soundproofing and a load of equipment, and it's rocking away down there. Yeah, I wrote just like a last minute holiday song back in December, and I was like, we've got to get it recorded and get it out because it just kind of goes with the vibe of this past holiday season. It was called Festive AF, and and so that was like the inaugural track we recorded in the studio, and like threw a little video together, and
Oh,
and
that's
that was a Reckless Eric and Amy Rigby single that we just like, I think we got it up like 2 days before Christmas or something. So it didn't actually have much chance to have like
no.
to be a Christmas number one or anything, but it was satisfying to like, to just like get something recorded and write a new song in the house and stuff, like because that's a very hard thing about moving, is just kind of like maybe all the mojo was there in the place where we were, and maybe we'll never find it again. And then, it is nice to like, you just have to get working again, and then it, just find it somehow.
Well, quite. No, it's an amazing how what we do really when we're under pressure, really, and what we can achieve. So with this next batch of dates, you got the album, then you've got a few dates in the UK, and then back to America as well. So again, sort of quite relentless kind of work rate here, isn't it?
I mean, it does help to sometimes, like last time when I was booking and we just moved, and the stress of like, trying to sell tickets and all that. And I just was telling, the only way I could sleep at night was to go like, and I never have to do this again if I don't want to. Like, I just don't have to do, and every time I do it, it is just so stressful and hard work. But the actual joy, I do feel joy when I play. Like I there's nothing else that really kind of like gives me that feeling of connection, and life and happiness that playing a gig for people does. So I just kind of have to keep doing it as long.
Yes, it's like as a lot of musicians say, it's kind of the only thing they kind of feel. They get to an age where you think, I can't keep ignoring it. This is the only thing I'm really going to enjoy in life, and I might as well now just commit to it. That's
Right.
just
I mean, I've long since passed that point. There's, because we have this really beautiful garden. That's part of the reason we got this house. And I saw a great quote from George Harrison's widow saying, George wanted to be remembered as a gardener who wrote a couple good tunes. And that's like, gardening does just really feel very compelling. It was really hard in upstate New York because there was like, it was either too hot or too cold. There was poison ivy, there was ticks that would give you Lyme disease. Whereas here, there's just like, even in February, you can be out there kind of tidying and making.
yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so that, I feel I feel like it is, like now I'm kind of like, oh, I want to keep working on music and stuff, but I do want to like spend time in the garden too.
Well, yes, and I guess where you are, do you occasionally? You must have big skies
Yeah.
on towards Norfolk, and the Northern Lights occasionally
Yeah.
might glimmer. So I guess it'll be quite
It's so,
different.
it's so beautiful being there. I am really happy with like the being near the sea and just the general landscape and everything. It is just so pretty, and it is much more moderate, like temperatures that you can kind of be outside. And
Yes, it's very easy, isn't it? The winters are fine, and the summers are generally good, and we get much much lighter evenings soon. So that's all good.
I'm just realizing I need to go make a spaghetti bolognese.
Well, I don't blame you. So on your tour, so you've got coming up, so it's music and literature.
Well, that definitely at the American Library and at the Larne weekend in Wales. I'll be doing both. And then in the US, it's kind of more, I have some band shows with, bass and drums, and those are kind of more rock shows.
Fantastic.
And then I'll be on the West Coast just solo. So there I'll probably do a little more mix of reading and playing. But yeah.
So who have you got in your band when you're doing your rock shows?
this will be in the US, it'll be Eric on bass and my husband playing bass and a drummer, our old neighbor from New York called Sam Shepard is his name. And so he'll be playing drums and then
right. Oh, that will be amazing. Well, look, Amy, thank you ever so much. You better go and make your spaghetti
it's been
bolognese.
so much fun to speak to you, David.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I've got my ticket for the 15th, so that's all very exciting.
No, the 14th.
14th.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, anyway, it's Friday.
Oh, it will be fun. I'm looking forward to
It'll be brilliant. I'm just very excited, actually.
I have to find a piece from because I haven't done any readings from the new book. So I need to incorporate something from that in there just to kind of
a taster.
Yeah, just to kind of break the ice on that. But
yeah, well, it will be brilliant. Well, look, thank you. And if you want, I can always send you a link to the show, and then you can put it on any of your social media platform sites and all that malarkey. But yes, but it's been fantastic. Liz, well, look, I'm so pleased that you're enjoying yourself in North Norfolk. It's like I said, we went to Holcombe today, and it's a beautiful place.
So wonderful.
So much to discover. Anyway,
I'll look forward to seeing you in Norwich.
Norwich, 14th of March. Right. Okay. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, is pure rock and roll. How to end an interview. Anyway, a massive thank you to Amy for giving me the time for that interview. And yes, as I said, I'll put links to both her book and also her website in the notes below. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on all those social media platform sites. It's not difficult. Also, all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes and Podbean. Check them out. They might just change your life. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.